Good morning. Welcome back. Glad that you are here. It's good to see you. Thanks for sticking with us. So we're going to dig into week 3, and we have covered a ton of stuff already. Like I said, I've kind of expanded this class a little bit, and so forgive me if some of this stuff feels rushed, and please feel free to interject and ask questions. I want to make sure there's no point in covering tons of content if it's not clear. But when I was looking back on the notes from 2020 when we first did this class, the stuff we're covering today was, I think, week 5. So we're moving at a clip because we've got a whole lot more stuff to do. But that's good. It's good stuff, and I'm glad we're sticking with it. So just to recap a little bit, week 1 we talked about this idea that everyone worships all the time. We are continuous outpourers. That worship and submission just flows out of us, and until we are saved by the grace of God through Christ, we do not know how to rightly address that worship to the only one who deserves it. And then as Christians, it's good for us to understand that and to be constantly reminded that our worship has to be rightly directed and focused. And how do we do that? How do we worship God as God designed us to worship him, how he has desired to be worshiped? We ended last week, we had to kind of rush through it because it was sort of an afterthought at the end and I was running out of time. So I just want to back up a little bit and talk a little bit more about the worship wars. We kind of mentioned that briefly at the end. How many of you are familiar with the term worship wars in general? Okay. How many of you experienced worship wars in your church? Yeah. It's a real thing. So just to back up and kind of recap, it was essentially the biggest struggle of it was if you could draw a line in the sand and sort of denote two armies here, it's traditional versus contemporary. And it's the desire to just keep sticking with traditional methods of hymns and piano and organ music and choirs, orchestras if you're in a bigger church, versus like the introduction of bands, acoustic guitars, basses, drums, all of that stuff, and then some of the early like Jesus music. So without going into like, I don't want to go into like a worship history class, but a lot of this developed earlier than you think it probably did. It didn't really like take hold in a lot of churches to where it affected enough people to get a name called worship wars until much later. But this traces back to like early like youth camp publications to like in like the 50s of how can we reach some young people? Let's try this new like borderline like rock and roll thing. And even though it wasn't any remotely rock and roll, it was like upright bass and an acoustic guitar, and it was like printed in a book, and it was like this will get the kids, like that kind of thing. And that just steamrolls and grows as more people get saved who don't have that traditional church background and want to learn new ways to serve. They bring in their influences, which is all a good thing. But what we discussed last week was that the whole idea of it being a worship war is largely a misnomer, because really in places where it was fought and did a lot of harm, neither side was right. You know what I mean? Like that's just not the way that churches are supposed to function and supposed to handle worship with a gathered body. I can remember being in some really heated business meetings as like the preacher's kid, and I felt terrible because my dad's up here having to face all these questions of like, why are we going to let your son's band play here on a Friday night? Even though it was like, it wasn't for a Sunday morning, it was just for outreach to the high school students in our area. And we had another Christian band from down the road coming in. Like these are like small town high schoolers in Christian bands, you know what I mean? Like we're literally just like playing Third Day covers and DC Talk covers. And writing really cheesy originals. And we had people like thinking like, well, how are we we can't afford to pay for security because there's going to be all these people trying to bring drugs in here. You know, like just the idea of like, when you said, there was any kind of hint of rock and roll, they immediately went to like, like a Rolling Stones concert that their cousin went to one time and got beat up, and they have all these terrible memories of. They kind of spurn into all of these different connotations with rock music. And all of that said, where we are now is we're post-war worshipers. We're after the worship wars, even though there's still, let's call them skirmishes going on here and there. There's still churches who wrestle with this. But we are largely, we're kind of past this, because I think a lot of people are understanding that there is no such thing as traditional in the way that it's been fought for, and there is no such thing as contemporary in the way that it's been fought for. Those words are very broad, and they mean very different things depending on where you go. And the example I gave last week, if you weren't here for it, it was right at the end, was that Angeline and I, we're only 4 years apart. So basically the same age. We went through churches at the same time. We both grew up in Southern Baptist churches. We both spent the majority of our lives at one church. And I grew up with hymns with a piano and organ on either side of the stage. And she grew up with praise choruses with a band leading them, and didn't really know any hymns until she met me and started going to a different church. It just wasn't part of their catalog. And so how do we grow up at the same time in the same denomination having vastly different experiences in worship music? It's just because the SBC is a lot more diverse than we think it is. She was in a suburb of Baltimore. I was in a cornfield town in southern Illinois. Very different demographics, very different influences. When the people in Redbud, Illinois got saved, they came to church and wanted to sing hymns. When the people who in Baltimore, who had no context for a Christianish culture, got saved, they didn't have a traditional to think back on. They didn't have any sweet memories of their community, this general cultural Christianity to lean on. It was all brand new, and so you sing new things. And by the time Angeline was worshiping there, they were no longer new. So the songs that she was singing felt old, even though they were brand new to my church. So it's just, we've realized now that time marches on, songwriters march on, and the world is constantly changing, music is constantly changing, influences are changing, and that picking a genre is not the way a church worship service should be built. That is not the key factor. It's barely a factor in how we design and manage our worship services. We can sing almost all of the songs that we sing at Buck Run in like 20 different genres. John was joking this morning about doing like a funk version. Like we could have slap bass on every single song this morning if we really wanted to. So the genre, the instrumentation is way less important than a lot of other factors that go into this. So that's the worship wars. What's important to know is that at a church this size especially, we're going to have people join us, and there may be people in this room, who carry with them a lot of actual hurt from that time period, from that struggle. I joke about it, I make light of it, but there's people who this will be the first church they've ever attended that doesn't fight about worship. That's a big deal, because that is a sacred moment every week. It's a guarded and holy moment, and to have been in a place where that is combative every Sunday, that's hard. That's a lot to carry. And so it can be a huge relief. And so it's just important for us, for those of us who didn't deal with that, to have compassion for those people and excitement for them, that they get to worship somewhere where we're not, clawing each other all the time about what we sing or what we don't sing. And kind of give us some perspective of how to move forward in this post-war era with grace and intentionality to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again, and to shepherd those people well who have been through that, and to help us worship united. And also realizing, again, with the size of this church, that there's going to be a ton of different preferences and backgrounds of what worship was like. Like Keith Starsman grew up in was it Lutheran church, I think? Was he Lutheran growing up? Methodist? It was one of those robed people. I don't know. Presbyterian? See, I don't know. It was That's Presbyterians, yeah. Frozen chosen, yeah. Yeah. That's great. So yeah, guys like Keith, who were like integral part of this band that we have here, just grew up with something completely different. So it's all important things to keep in mind. Yeah, it's a pattern that has repeated over and over and over again throughout history, throughout church history. Bach was way too radical and bombastic for his time period. It was too intense. It was non-congregational. How was this approachable? But yeah, 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of new hymns are being written that are like, leaning on the everlasting arms and things like that we think of as traditional hymns, but they're very recent. Like that's recent history that those hymns were written. Traditional goes, in terms of what we've been worshiping with in the United States, it was How Firm a Foundation and like a lot of these older Isaac Watts hymns that had much more rigid melodies. So yeah, it's a repeated battle over and over again. I think the reason why the worship awards period got the attention that it did is partly because of it's easier to disperse the news of those kind of things in the 80s and the 90s. And and it was just a heated time. So, but yeah, that's a great point. It's something that we've done over and over. All right, so let's look forward at building a post-war theology of worship. And we have 5 key fundamentals that we're going to look at over the next few weeks. Number 1 is content. Our content is significant. And in our content, we want to focus on adoration and instruction. Number 2 is quality. And in our pursuit of quality, we're looking at excellence and creativity. And we'll break both of those two down today and kind of explain a little bit more how we view those rightly. Third is unity, and this gets back to the worship wars thing. Preference and deference. We'll talk about that. And then 4th, intentionality, shepherding and discipleship. And then 5th, cultivation, training and equipping. So today we're going to talk about content and adoration and get into quality if we can as well. Content, adoration, and instruction. It matters what we sing. I can't state that over and over again enough. Like it just really matters what we sing. The songs that we put before the church matter. It is a part of a very holy moment that we have here together. And it's something that we don't do lightly. It's something that we pour a lot of time and effort into, not just myself, but all of the pastors. We take it very seriously. And we have guardrails put up that protect us, hopefully, from singing things that we shouldn't in front of our church, because we're engaging with words when we do this, and words matter, words have meaning, and we want to sing the right things. Should be plural, songs selected for congregational worship are carefully inspected for their content. And then we've got a few musts here, and that these are just, there's probably more beyond this, but these are some of the clear musts. They must be theologically correct. I wish I could just go back one step instead of back to the beginning of the animation. I don't know how to do that. There's probably a setting somewhere. They must be theologically correct. We're not going to sing anything heretical, hopefully. If you hear me sing something heretical, please tell me. And if you get good at that, I'll give you an actual red flag, and you can wave the red flag in the service. And I'll just stop the song, be like, I trust him. I'm not going to keep singing. No, there are things that are theologically incorrect in modern worship music. Not at all modern worship music. I don't think it's quite the plague that some people think that it is. I don't think it's as rampant as some people believe, but it is out there. And most of the time, it's pretty benign. It's usually tertiary issues, or it's just clumsy lyrics. And that's what I would argue is most often the case. It's just clumsy. It's not, you have churches and bands that are under the gun to churn out songs at an incredible rate. I mean, you think of Passion puts out like a 15-song worship album every single year. So they're at least writing 30 songs before they can whittle down to get to 15. It's just over and over and over again having to churn this stuff out. And a lot of these people writing songs are like 19 years old. You know what I mean? Like, give them some break. Like there's gonna be some slip-ups here and there, because like some talented kid gets a chance to write a song. Like, yeah, he may not have like the most robust understanding of creation, and so his like depiction of creation might be a little sloppy. That's the majority of what we see when we see theologically incorrect songs. It's just a little clumsy, but the way that we address that, handle that, is even though I don't believe that 99% of the time, I don't believe there's any malintent with the songwriters, I don't believe it's some conspiracy to subvert our theology. Even though all of that is true, I still don't sing songs that we identify as being theologically incorrect, because, as we'll get to in just a minute with this instruction thing, we need these songs to teach us, and we don't want to teach you untrue things. And lyrics have this important ability to ring in our heads throughout the week, and we don't want untrue things ringing in your head, even if it's a minor thing. Think about the song Reckless Love. How many of you know the song Reckless Love? We don't sing Reckless Love here. I don't think there is any intention of the songwriter to undermine the sovereignty of God when he wrote Reckless Love. He didn't sit down and be like, all right, boys, we got to get at these Calvinists. We got to attack them, and I think we can do it with this really catchy song. I don't think that was the plan. I don't think reckless is a good way of describing God's saving grace. I think it's just a little sloppy, so we don't sing it. I don't have any problem with that songwriter. I don't think he's going to hell. I just think that particular line is a little sloppy. Now, if we sang it here, a good portion of our church would love it. It's a fun song, and I think you would see a lot of physical expressions of worship, and they would be excited about that, and their heart would be stirred up to actually think true things about the sovereignty of God, because they've been sitting under a great preacher for so long that they understand how to rightly think about him. So I think we could do it here without doing any harm, but just to be on the safe side, and because there's so many songs out there, we just don't do it. And we're not mad about it. That's the big thing, is that we're going to draw lines in the sand on some other things, but we're not going to get angry about it. Like, we're not going to throw any stones at churches that sing Reckless Love on a regular basis, because this is not the point. That's their own thing, and we believe in that freedom, and it's not heresy. I think it's just sloppy. So we sing things that must be theologically correct. Also, they must correctly apply Scripture. I think it's pretty clear when songs aren't based on Scripture, even if they're not directly quoting or paraphrasing Scripture. And there are some songs that I think do apply Scripture, but apply it incorrectly. I think the broadest example of this is there's a lot of prosperity gospel type songs that take the promises of God meant for salvation or meant for the kingdom of Israel and apply it to, like, I'm going to get a Mercedes kind of thing. And I don't want to sing anything that makes you think you're going to get a Mercedes, because I still don't have a Mercedes. And until I get a Mercedes, you can't have one. So we're not going to sing that. But that's the most rampant, I think, use of that is prosperity gospel type twists in the text. Again, I don't think it's out of malintent in most cases. I don't think people are trying to misapply Scripture. They're in a church where that misapplication of Scripture is being preached. And so it makes sense that they would sing it. They must encourage obedience and not sin. I don't know of any worship songs that are like actively encouraging disobedience. But I think if you get into the minutia of it, I think there are right and wrong ways that we respond to suffering. There are right and wrong ways that we respond to lostness in the world. And so we don't want to sing songs that teach us the wrong ways to respond to those things. There are songs that are a little bit too open-ended in their acceptance, and it can imply in the untrained ear some acceptance of sins that we do not accept. Is that the most politically correct way I can try to frame that? Is that we don't want to sing songs that make you think that we are affirming of things that we are not affirming of. Even though, again, I think the majority of Buck Run would not be tricked by that. But we're a big group of folks. You guys in this room are core folks. That's why you're in here. Not everyone here is on the same page, and so we just have to be careful how we shepherd those words that come out of our lips when we sing. They must lead our hearts to respond in adoration and submission. Adoration, obviously, is that we want to lift up God and make his name great. In submission, back to the obedience thing, is that we want to serve him. We want to submit to God, esteem ourselves lower than him, and pursue him in submission. And lastly, they must offer instruction to the truths and practices of following Christ. So we want songs that will teach us how to lament properly, songs that will teach us how to face various trials. I was just speaking with a member who was here early and heard the songs that we were singing, and she was like, well, I'm going to be a puddle today because these are the kinds of songs that like her heart needs this morning to respond rightly to very difficult situations in her life. And that's what we want. It's not meant to like tug at heartstrings and make people cry for the sake of an emotional effect. It's meant to reinforce things that a regenerate heart already knows about who God is and how he cares for us and how he loves us. It's to shore up those beliefs, galvanize them in our hearts, and teach us how to do these things well. Teach us how to love and serve others, all those kinds of things. Yeah, we want those true things to be ringing in our hearts as we go throughout the week, and we're no longer surrounded by other believers, but we're facing those things head on. A lot of what I've been saying this morning has been geared at believers, but Michelle makes a great point that there's non-believers in the room also, and so we want them to hear true things. We want them to hear a clear explanation, presentation of the gospel, not just in the preached word, but in the songs that we sing. This quote from Harold Best. He says, I cannot insist enough on the strategic importance of a speech-rich church to a speech-degraded culture. The church is, after all, a rich cross-section of civilization. Mothers, fathers, farmers, technicians, scientists, teachers, lawyers, and artisans. No one is excused from the responsibility to speak carefully, temperately, accurately, even poetically. For the authentic worshiper, nothing but God is awesome. Again, this book was not written in the last couple years, but I love how much this just continues to be even more true of living in a speech-degraded culture. I mean, we are a meme-ified TikTok generation that has reduced everything down to sarcasm and jokes and skits on video, and it is a speech-degraded culture. We don't know how to communicate very well with words. And words have significance and meaning. They're important. They shape us. And so the church needs to be a bastion of careful text, care and attention given to the words that we say, pray, sing, preach, all of that. Any questions on that about why it matters what we sing? And again, I didn't want to interject here and go straight into the elephant of like, how do you feel about singing Hillsong, Elevation, Bethel, all that stuff? We will get to that in the coming weeks, but I just think the rest of the stuff is too good. I don't want to derail us too much right here, but we will come back to that. All right, so let's look at particularly adoration. Responding in worship always begins with adoration and submission, because we cannot worship that which we esteem lower than ourselves. I think we said this last week, but it's worth repeating. You just cannot hold something else higher than hold yourself higher than something else and then worship it. We must come here with humility and a readiness to submit and to serve. And submission is a great way to squash any worship wars. Humility doesn't go to war over preference. It just doesn't. It may sit through some really awful songs, and that can happen. But it doesn't go to war over it. So we begin with adoration and submission. We esteem God and his gospel and his kingdom higher than ourselves, and we worship God. Psalm 33:3 says, "Sing to him a new song." No, sorry, that's the wrong verse. Where's the one? Psalm 117. "Praise the Lord, all nations. Extol him, all peoples." Psalm 145:3. "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable." Psalm 145 is an excellent passage to look at it. Just this crazy outpouring of just bursting with how great God is. And that's where we begin. We begin with just recognizing that God is great, he is powerful, he is sovereign, he is holy. All worship starts there because it sets us in the right place in our hearts of who we esteem higher than ourselves. The first priority of our time together is to magnify the Lord. I want to help people remember that God is bigger than their problems and joys, greater than their sorrows and successes, and more significant than their tests and triumphs. It's Bob Coughlin in his book, Worship Matters. So we come in with humility, we lift up God's name, we proclaim it, and part of what that does is exactly what he says here. It reminds all of us together that God is bigger than our problems. He's also bigger than our joys, right? Some of us are coming in here straight out of the gutter, and some of us are coming in here on cloud nine. And all of us together get humbled before the Lord, that God is bigger than all of those things. And so it's a humbling thing. It can also be an exalting thing where it lifts us up out of the gutter and reminds us that this incredible big God has us in his hand. He is in control. So wherever we come from, our sorrows, our successes, tests and triumphs, God is bigger. So we begin with adoration. Let's look at a couple examples of how we do adoration at church specifically through music. Now, obviously, adoration, like all kinds of worship, flows into other elements of worship, but we're going to talk a lot about music right now. So we can proclaim God's greatness. We can shout it out and rejoice in it, proclaiming God's greatness. And here's just a couple examples. Holy, holy, holy. Great hymn proclaims God's greatness. All creatures of our God and King. And the more contemporary one, look and see. Look and see our God. I'm trying to remember the words now. Celebrate. Yeah, thank you. Look and see our God, celebrate the power of the cross. Just a lot of songs that really lift it up, lift his name high and say, look at our God. Look at how great he is. So that's one example of proclaiming God's greatness. But on the other side of that coin is loving God's greatness. Think of a song that we've started singing here recently, Firm Foundation. Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. It's a more tender approach, a more tender look at God's greatness. Great is thy faithfulness. My favorite hymn, if that ever comes up at trivia night at Buck Run, what's Adrian's favorite hymn? It's Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. We also really enjoy, and we sing here, the verses that John Piper added on to Great is thy faithfulness, because they're incredible, because John Piper's a poet and just did an amazing job. But it's this tender appeal to love the greatness of God. Yet not I, but through Christ in me, one of the most powerful contemporary hymns written in the last 10, 20 years. So you see kind of the difference of sort of the big bombastic, like, look at who God is, he's great. And then the more like humbled servant, loving who God is, look at what he's done for me. This is how he has cared for me. And both of those are important. This combination of proclaiming and loving is what leads us to true adoration. It's the wedding of truth and passion, mind and heart. We never want to steer too far one way or the other. And it's not that we can't love God's greatness when we sing holy, holy, holy. That's not the point. The point is that there's just different approaches to how these songs work, how they function in the wedding of text and melody. And the way that shepherds our heart is important. It's important for us to have this wedding of truth and passion that leads us to adoration. Yes, yeah, we do. You'll notice that a lot that Michelle was saying that we typically start services here with that big proclaiming God's greatness thing. And that's true. This morning we're singing Sooner Count the Stars. And it's just lifting up, like I could sooner count the stars than number all of your ways. Someone remind me of the chorus. I have too many songs in my head at all times. Is high enough, no praise is loud enough. That's just building up who God is, that we can't even, there aren't even enough words. We cannot search the stars and fully understand his magnificence. So we start with that. And what's really cool, and we'll talk about this in the next coming weeks, is that's not new. That idea of beginning a service with proclaiming God's greatness is ancient. We've been doing that for a long, long time. Different songs, obviously. They weren't singing Sooner Count the Stars in 600 AD, but they were singing hymns that proclaim God's greatness. And this liturgical flow that we use here is an old model. And it kind of helps tie us in and feel a connection to saints who have gone long before us, because it's this pattern that shepherds our hearts well through the gospel story. And so we'll talk about that more later weeks when we talk about liturgy and how we shape a service. But yeah, that's a great point. All right, and then instruction. We believe that responding in worship is made richer through instruction. Colossians 3:16 says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God." The word of Christ dwelling in us richly, that's the starting point. And then from there, we use that to teach and admonish one another, even with the songs, hymns, and spiritual psalms that we're singing to one another. So we want these songs to be instructive. There's a great, if you're really interested in this and want to dive more into it from a leadership perspective, there's a great podcast called the Sound Plus Doctrine podcast. It's a plus symbol. And it's by Bob Coughlin and David Zimmer of Sovereign Grace. And they work through a lot of these things. And they're not long, rambling podcasts. They're very manageable, usually 20 to 30 minutes. But they talk about this kind of stuff a lot, about how important it is to teach doctrine through the songs that we sing. And Bob Coughlin was the first person I had ever really heard talk about that years ago. My song selection in my very, very early days of leading worship, when I was, just volunteering, late high school, early college, 2004, 2005, it never once occurred to me when I was picking out songs to pick out songs that would teach something to our people. Just did not cross my mind. That wasn't a category for me. And it may not be a category for you. This may be the first time you're thinking about this. But it's so important. Thankfully, by God's grace, most of the songs that other people were writing, they were thinking about that. And so there was good stuff out there that we were teaching. But you can even hear, if you look at CCLI Top 100. Who knows what CCLI is? You've heard of that. It's it's the licensing company that licenses the rights to sing worship music. So we'll talk about publication stuff again later, but essentially we pay a annual fee, and then we can sing whatever worship songs we want, and then the artists get paid. So it's like a Spotify subscription, but for performance of music. And they keep track of that, and then based on how many churches sing what songs is what percentage those artists get in their fees or whatever. But if you look back at the top 100, or let's say top 50 songs that churches have sung throughout the years, you can see a shift where where we became, as a capital C church, we became more aware of the need to instruct in the words in the songs that we sing. And so the words started getting richer and richer. And I think part of that is you have pioneers in this field like Sovereign Grace and the Gettys who took this kind of stuff very seriously, and their songs started getting so popular that other worship machines that were churning out this stuff all the time were like, why are these songs resonating? Like, their production value's not as good, the recording's not as good. Why is it sticking? And I think it started to click that, like, oh, it's just because they're singing really good, true things, and people are learning the faith. In Christ Alone, we take that song for granted. That song was pretty radical when it came out. That was there's a lot of theology and instruction packed into that song. So much so that the Gettys get emails and letters from other churches who want to sing that song, but they ask permission to take out some of the lines and change the words because they don't even believe in all of the theology that's packed into it. And thankfully, they just say, no, you can sing something else. But it's such a popular song that churches that don't believe everything that it sings want to sing it. And so you can see kind of a shift in our culture where we started really taking this instruction element very seriously. Our song should teach the doctrines of our faith. One thing that I heard that was really encouraging at a worship conference for songwriters, Bob Coughlin said, if you're wondering what you should write about, look at your statement of faith, whatever church you're at. For us, it's the Baptist Faith and Message. And scan through it and see what things on that statement of faith have you not sung about recently? Or do you not sing about maybe at all? And let's write a song about that. Let's get people singing and rehearsing these truths that we believe. So it's not just a website, a link on our website, but it's something that we're actually singing and proclaiming regularly. Our song should teach the behaviors of a Christ follower. All of these things, teaching our doctrines, teaching our behaviors. Music has this power to open up our hearts. And when our hearts are opened up through the power of music, we need to be intentional to fill them up with biblical truth. We can open up hearts and fill it with some garbage. And that does happen. Like the prosperity gospel type songs that I mentioned before. Like, we can tell people untrue things. We can twist scripture. And so we have to be very careful, understanding that music is powerful because God designed it to be powerful. It stirs up our emotions because God designed it to stir up our emotions. None of those things are bad. But if we're going to do that, if we're going to open up our hearts, we have to fill them with biblical truth and shepherd that well. But teaching the behaviors, we need to learn how to mourn, how to lament, how to rejoice, how to pray, how to persevere. All of these things are things that our songs can teach us. And also, not all songs have to be intellectual to be instructional. Like, the Gettys tend to write very intellectual songs. Like I said, their songs are rich and packed. They're dense with theology and penny whistles for some reason. But there's a lot of good theology packed into them. They're very intellectual. You can still teach through a song that's not so dense, through a song that's not so packed. I think of Before the Throne of God Above. Dense song. Lots of really solid theology in there. You can draw, you could do a whole Bible study on the things that hymn covers. But then there's a song like John Mark McMillan's King of My Heart. Who knows how the chorus of King of My Heart goes? You are good, good. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's it. But is that instructional? It is when you're in a hospital room and you don't remember the goodness of God. It's instructional. It rings in our hearts, and it reminds us that in all of these trials, God is still good. So we learn things through intellectually dense and through more simplified songs. It's not that John Mark McMillan's not smart. He knows all of those things. He's a wise man. But it's good for us to have these other types of songs as well. They don't have to be They don't have to read like a systematic theology in order to teach us and instruct us. Yeah, the repetition thing. Repetition got blasted for a long time in the 90s. It still gets blasted. You know what I mean? Like, it's just an ongoing meme of modern worship music is the repetition. Right, exactly. Have you read a psalm? Like, repetition is repetition for a reason. And granted, some songs, obviously, yes, they do go overboard. That's why you'll never hear us do the 12-minute versions of a Hillsong song. We'll whittle that down. Like, I don't know how many times in praise band I'm like, go ahead and cross out chorus 2 times 3, bridge times 2, chorus 2 times 3. You know what I mean? Like, we're just cutting stuff all the time. But repetition is important. It's good to sing that he is good over and over and over and over again, because it's going to solidify that in our hearts. All right, how are we doing on time? Good, we got time. All right, let's talk about quality. In quality, our two main ingredients that we're looking at are excellence and creativity. Excellence and creativity. The pursuit of excellence in worship is biblical, and it is God-honoring. In Psalm 33:3, it says, "Sing to him a new song, play skillfully on the strings with loud shouts." So even in Scripture, we are called to play skillfully. We are called to work hard in everything that we do for the Lord. Colossians 3:23, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." That goes for our endeavors here at church. The way that we reset rooms after VBS, the way that we welcome people and make sure the coffee is ready and the creamers are perfect and everything's set. We work hard at that. Not because we're trying to attract someone, not because we want them to come in and admire our coffee, but because we do this stuff because we're working hard for the Lord. Everything we do here, every aspect of what we do at Buck Run, it's for the Lord. And this transfers back into our 9-to-5 jobs, right? We do those, even though they're secular jobs. We work at them as if we were working for the Lord. And so that, of course, applies to how we are here. And for church musicians, we practice, we rehearse, we do all of that stuff as if we were doing it for the Lord. But this is an important qualifier here, that excellence for the worshiper is more in the striving than in the outcome. Excellence for the worshiper is more in the striving than in the outcome. Harold Best says, "Excellence is the process," note the word process, "of becoming better than I once was. Because God does all things well, we should likewise do well. And while we strive to be truthful, we will strive to state truth beautifully. And in proceeding this way, I honor God by trying to work as God does. In the meantime, God is free to work anytime, in any place, and in any way at all." There are some different schools of thought on this, depending on who you read and how far back in history you go, on what excellence looks like for the believers, particularly for believers in the arts, and for how the arts impact the church. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's important to share those responsibilities, and because we're all here and serving on that together. But yeah, like, and I think it helps us strive for excellence better when it's not just one person like over encumbered with too many responsibilities. Yeah, they're great at rounding up volunteers because Buck Run's great at serving. Buck Run's great. The people are great at responding and serving well. If you go back and read, other people other philosophers, other Christian thinkers have kind of thought differently on this. I love C.S. Lewis, but one of the things that I disagree with him on, which is a bold thing to say because he's more wisdom in his pinky than in my brain, but C.S. Lewis had a different approach, a different philosophy on excellence, and thought that excellence really meant like we need to only put forth the best of the best of the best of the best. And where I think that falls apart is in the local church. because I think you can be a gathered body of believers without having a whole lot of skill. That happens. And I don't mean like all kinds of skill. I mean mostly pertaining to the arts, right? Right now at my dad's church, it's a small church. There's like 60 people on a Sunday morning, and their worship leader is at home dealing with very dangerous lung disease. So obviously he can't sing. And it's a small church. There's not a whole lot of other people to lean on. Obviously, there's a different level of skill in a church that size between the worship leader and the next man up. Is that worship still accepted by God? Is it less worshipful than what we do here on Sunday morning? I don't think it is. I think, like, stylistically it's different, and there are a lot of ways we can measure it, but it's acceptance as an offering before God. We don't get to measure that. We can't pull out the tape measure and say whether or not this is holy or not. God takes that and redeems it. So what Harold Best, he has this different kind of approach where he thinks that, like he said, excellence is a process of becoming better than I once was. It's not a presentation of the best. Which is holier? Bach's Mass in B minor, or an Appalachian granddad playing Amazing Grace on a 4-string guitar on his porch? Well, it depends on who's playing it, right? I've heard lost people play Bach's Masses perfectly. I don't think that offering even made it to the front door of heaven. But a regenerate heart stumbling through a hymn, that's a direct line. That's right there. Because God receives that as a humble, submitted, adoring offering to him. So excellence is great, and I don't think Bach was wrong in striving for excellence. Bach had the skills to do it. Bach pushed himself. Jenna, you're a classical music fan. What's the one fugue where only 3 people can play it on organ because the feet are moving so fast? Do you remember which one that is? I can't remember. It might be. But there's one, I've watched YouTube videos of yeah. Yeah, it's like they're tap dancing, but with extreme precision, while also playing the organ up here with extreme precision. And that's like just really ordering your body into submission to work through this finely tuned masterpiece. And for some people, that's the right thing to do because they have the skills to do it. I can't do that. That's not the right approach for worship for me. It would be a mess. But in Bach's writing that, I think he knows that that's going to push people. And so I don't think Bach's intent was to present perfection. I think it was present something you have to strive for and to model the striving. We believe that it's in the striving, and our scriptural basis for this, one of them, there's a lot, is the widow's offering. Luke 21. Would anyone like to read this passage for us? It's not super long. Luke 21, verses 1 through 4. They contributed out of their abundance, but she in her poverty put in all that she had to live on. This pertains to more than just our currency. The economy of skill leaves some with riches and some in poverty. Yeah. It sounds rude, but it's true. Some people have artistic, musical, whatever, however you want to look at it, skills, and some people don't. Some people have an abundance of it. There are countless worship leaders who are way, way more talented than I am. But what unites us is that we give as much as we can give. We give everything that we have, and that's what is acceptable before God. We are called to worship out of our riches or our poverty. Yeah, that's a great question. So our question is, what do you do in a church situation when you have someone with a poverty of skill who is on the platform and or effort and is doing their job so poorly that it becomes a distraction. That would be like C.S. Lewis's first, like, ha, gotcha, like, she shouldn't be up there. And I think the way we do that is, if we look back at like our 5 fundamentals, part of that is intentionality, shepherding, discipleship, cultivating, training, and equipping. Part of that is that person's worship acceptable? Let's look down at the core roots of it. Well, it depends on their heart. Did they try? Did they strive to that end? Or is it mediocrities because it's lazy, because there was no effort put in? So that, those are things I don't know. I wasn't there. But like that is what we consider. Also, what you need to know is that not every worshiper needs to be on the stage. That's okay. We have to work through this with our students all the time, and we're trying to teach this to them early. Your worship can be holy and acceptable to God. It does not have to be on a platform. We have to shepherd the platform very carefully. We guard it really tightly here at Buck Run. We're really like, it's leadership. We're pretty chill about a lot of things. We're not chill about who gets on the stage. We take that super seriously. For part of this reason is that if somebody is up there and they are leading very poorly, then they're not fulfilling that job. It doesn't mean that their worship isn't holy and acceptable before God. It just means that they're not fulfilling that role of leadership in that moment. Because everyone on the worship platform Sunday morning is a worship leader. I am not the only worship leader up there. Every single person is. So that's something that we do have to guard. Now, the flip side of that, in my home church, we had a choir regularly. I'm thinking before praise band days, piano, organ, choir. And there was a woman with a mental disability who was in the choir who could not sing a single note. Now, was that distracting? I argue that it was not, because in that church family, in that context, because context is everything. In that context, we knew that woman, and we knew her heart, and we received those awful notes as a song of praise. And it encouraged us rather than distracting us, because we knew that she was physically unable to reach the level of musical quality that her peers could reach. Exactly. Listen, I'm not going to say any names, but I can hear some of y'all on Sunday morning, okay? And it's not great, but it's great. You know what I mean? Like, it's not pitch perfect, but it's exactly what my heart needs. Some of the loudest people in our church don't have the best ear for harmony, but I love it. It makes me so glad, and it makes the Lord glad. So and you should still sing loud.
I'd rather hear that than the crickets that you get.
Right. Listen, I've been in both churches. I've been in musically excellent churches where no one sings, and I've been in musically impoverished churches where everyone sings poorly. And I would take the latter every single time. It's always better, because it's about the heart of what we're doing and the heart of our sacrifice before God. Right. We're about out of time, so I'm going to blaze through this real quick. Yes. This striving for excellence, this is not a free pass for dwelling in mediocrity. That's not what we're fighting for here. Harold Best says, instead of wondering why God works through mediocrity at all, we should assume that God would prefer excellence, but not at the expense of spiritual integrity. So one of the reasons why we will never hire musicians to round out the band on Sunday morning, especially like lost musicians. There are churches that do this. I'm 100% opposed to it. I would argue that all day long. You do not hire lost gig musicians to fill out your band on Sunday morning. Just crack open a hymnal and sing a cappella if you have to. Don't bring in the world to satisfy some musical checkbox so that you can achieve something, because that is not God-honoring. That does not fulfill the call of what we're trying to do. So don't wonder why God works through mediocrity. Assume he would prefer excellence. Yes. Yeah. No one on the stage just joined yesterday. No one on the stage isn't a member. Okay, real quick, and I'll have to hit some of this again, but this is the key here, is that Jesus perfects our offerings. This is why we strive, but we don't have to meet excellence. God sees and hears all of our offerings perfected. God sees and hears as no human being can, all because our offerings have been perfected by the giver. The out-of-tune singing of an ordinary believer, the hymnic chant of the Aborigine, the open frankness of a primitive art piece, the nearly transcendent Kyrie of Bach's B minor Mass, the praise choruses of the charismatic, the drum praise of the Cameroonian, everything from the widow's mite to the poured out ointment of artistic action are at once humbled and exalted by the strong saving work of Christ. While the believer offers, Christ perfects. It is all of Christ and it is all of faith. That's the key piece here. Everything we do is short of the glory of God. I use the refrigerator art example all the time. Our fridge is covered in it. Ellis's drawings have no consideration for light or form. He's barely considering color. Just really pitiful drawings. Not a single bit inside the line. And why are they all over my fridge? Because I love them. Because I love my son. And how much more does Christ love his children? Perfect love. He doesn't get mad at his children the way that I lose my temper with Ellis. He loves them so much more. So whatever we bring, whether it's that Appalachian hymn or it's Bach's Mass, you just need to understand that Bach's most complicated fugue is refrigerator art compared to the holiness of what God deserves. We cannot achieve what he is worthy of. So everything that we present to him, he hears as perfect through his blood.